Tertullian, known as the father of Latin theology, is remembered as one of Gnosticism's greatest critics. But what if it was all a cover story? Close your eyes and picture the final judgment. The dead rising from their graves. Bodies reassembled. Christ enthroned above the world. Books opened. Names called. The righteous separated from the condemned. Fire consuming the wicked. Kings and commoners standing side by side before an irreversible verdict. It is one of the most recognizable images in Western religious imagination. It appears in cathedrals, paintings, sermons, poetry, and popular culture. Even those far removed from Christian doctrine often carry some version of it. A cosmic courtroom, a public reckoning, a final separation that settles history once and for all. But where did that particular configuration come from? The New Testament contains apocalyptic imagery. Jewish tradition already spoke of resurrection and judgment. Yet the fully dramatized structure, the insistence on the resurrection of the same flesh, the theatrical reversal of persecutors and victims, the public exposure of rulers, the irreversible allocation of souls, did not simply assemble itself. It was sharpened, codified, standardized. And here the trail leads back to Tertullian. The final judgment had long existed as concept, from early Hebrew stories of Sheol through the prophets, and throughout early apocalyptic literature. But Tertullian, he gave it a distinctive clarity, embodied, juridical, spectacular. De Spectaculis 30 really is the ultimate passage. He pivots from condemning Roman shows to imagining the second coming and the last judgment as the only show worth anticipating. And he piles on vivid set pieces. Resurrection, a universal tribunal, the world consumed in flame, persecuting rulers and governors in punishment, and the humiliation of the mighty. He framed resurrection as compelled reassembly, judgment as visible tribunal, fire as consequence imposed, reversal as public vindication. In his rhetoric, the end of history becomes the ultimate spectacle, more decisive than any earthly arena, which raises a deeper question. If this is the imagery that shaped centuries of imagination, if this outward, theatrical, judicial drama became the dominant lens, what exactly is that drama doing? Is it simply literal doctrine rendered vividly? Or is it a deliberate inversion of another way of imagining restoration and accountability? When resurrection is framed as forced reassembly, does that negate an inward coherence? When judgment is staged publicly, does that imply a reckoning that might otherwise occur within? When reversal is enacted as spectacle, is it exposing something about the psychology of spectatorship itself? Before we can ask whether Tertullian was opposing, mirroring, or encoding something more subtle, we have to recognize the fulcrum. The judgment image we take for granted is not neutral. It has a shape, it has a direction, and that direction may be the key to everything that follows. In the late 2nd and early 3rd centuries, few Christian writers spoke with more sharpness or confidence than Tertullian of Carthage. He is remembered as the fierce defender of embodied resurrection, the champion of public judgment, the critic of speculative cosmologies, and the relentless opponent of teachers such as Valentinus. In treatises like Adversus Valentinianos, he openly ridicules the intricate mythic systems that circulated in texts resembling the Apocryphon of John. Where others spoke in layered symbolism and emanations, Tertullian spoke in flesh, fire, and verdict. The historical narrative is pretty straightforward. Tertullian rejects hidden knowledge. He stands firmly against secretive myth. He insists that salvation is not about escaping matter, but rather, it's about the resurrection of it. He demands public accountability, not some kind of esoteric illumination. If there were a clean dividing line between so-called orthodox literalism and Gnostic symbolism, he seems firmly planted on one side. But what if that clarity is actually the point? What if, perhaps, the most effective way to transmit a structure of thought into hostile territory isn't to affirm it openly, but to restate it in negated form? What if, instead of proclaiming inward awakening, one describes outward enforcement so rigorously that the attentive reader can't help but infer the inward alternative? Was Tertullian simply attacking Gnostic myth, or was he in fact recasting its logic in reverse? The question isn't whether Tertullian openly taught Gnostic cosmology. He didn't. The question is subtler. Does his eschatology work as a systematic negation of the very same patterns that Gnostic myth affirms? In Gnostic systems, accountability is interior. You awaken, recognize your origin, and demand truth of yourself. In Tertullian, accountability is exterior. You are summoned, judged, and assigned by authority. The structure, restoration, revelation, separation, remains. But the direction shifts, and that shift is everything. If resurrection is framed as forced reassembly before judgment, does it not imply that true restoration would otherwise be inward coherence? If judgment is imposed publicly, doesn't it suggest that authentic reckoning could occur within? If tyrants are overthrown by decree rather than dissolved by insight, isn't that just the negated image of liberation through knowledge? This study proceeds by placing these patterns side by side in a consistent structure. Each time we start with Tertullian's outward condemnation, his insistence on flesh, tribunal, spectacle, fire, sovereign judgment, and eternal allocation. We examine the logic as he presents it. Then, we turn the structure inward and consider the corresponding Gnostic affirmation that such a negation implies. By keeping the same categories throughout, the contrast becomes visible, not as some random similarity, but as a repeated inversion. If accountability is to be demanded from without, then something has to be summoned to answer. Resurrection becomes the foundation of the whole structure. It's the gathering of the self into a stable defendant. Before there can be judgment, there must be reassembly. What rises, and why, determines everything that follows. Tertullian frames resurrection as a compelled return of the whole person, specifically of the flesh, to the arena of judgment. When he insists that the flesh shall rise again. Certainly the same flesh, he's not just defending a metaphysical claim about bodies. He's actually constructing a moral mechanism. The very substance that participated in action must be brought back so that action cannot evade accounting. The narrative force here is outward. Resurrection isn't primarily the soul's recovery of its origin. It's the court's summons, the world's recall of every agent to answer for what was done in the world. Read as mythos, this becomes a drama of enforced coherence. The self that could once disperse responsibility into forgetfulness, excuses, social roles, or private rationalizations, is now reconstituted as a single, continuous defendant. The same flesh acts almost like an identity lock. You can't claim that the agent who sinned has dissolved, or that your past self isn't really you. Resurrection is, therefore, the negated image of inward transformation. The person doesn't rise because insight has matured. The person rises because judgment requires a stable object upon which to lay recompense. In the affirmative Gnostic mode, resurrection tends to mean awakening rather than reanimation. The self rises when it recognizes what it is, where it comes from, and how it's been held in ignorance. Accountability is interiorized. The demand is not first, let others be forced to answer, but rather, let me see truly so I cannot hide from what I am. The body may appear as a symbol of sleep, heaviness, captivity, but the decisive movement is inward recollection and self-recognition, a return to spiritual fullness through knowledge, not just embodied exposure through summons. When the direction shifts from outward to inward, the message changes from enforced continuity to chosen integrity. In Tertullian's pattern, the world must gather you back together because you won't gather yourself. In the Gnostic pattern, you gather yourself back together through knowledge that makes evasion impossible. The negation produces a legal theater of accountability imposed upon the agent. The affirmation produces a spiritual awakening where the agent becomes the site of accountability. Both demand reckoning, but one stages it as compulsory reassembly before an external judge, and the other as voluntary reconstitution before truth itself. But once the self is reconstituted, where does it stand? Resurrection alone doesn't complete the drama, it actually prepares an appearance. If the body returns, it returns to a gaze. The question now is whether reckoning takes place within the self. or before a tribunal. Tertullian's final judgment isn't just that God knows all, it's that all will be made to appear. His insistence that we shall all stand before the judgment seat of Christ treats publicity as a core part of justice. The tribunal is cosmic and visible, not just some inward realization that one has erred, but a disclosure enacted before a judge whose authority is external and decisive. Judgment is rendered as verdict, and the verdict isn't private illumination but public settlement. Mythically, this transforms revelation into exposure. The world's hidden economies, status, violence, hypocrisy, persecution, self-justification, are all hauled into the open as if to say, what you concealed by power and narrative will be forced into the light by decree. The moral drama isn't that people come to see themselves, it's that people are made to be seen as they are. This is the negation. The self doesn't become transparent to itself first. Rather, it's made transparent to the tribunal. The meaning of truth shifts from insight to evidence, and from interior discernment to externally established judgment. In Gnostic affirmation, apocalypse is fundamentally unveiling as knowledge, truth becoming present within the knower, and in doing so, dissolving the conditions of deception. Judgment is not, first and foremost, a courtroom event, but a cognitive and ontological disclosure. When the soul recognizes the false structures governing it, those structures lose their hold. Accountability arises as a form of clarity. The soul can't remain complicit once it knows, and the court is the awakened discernment that makes prior delusions intolerable. Changing the direction from outward to inward changes the moral center. In Tertullian's public tribunal, the world is corrected because the judge intervenes and compels disclosure. In the Gnostic pattern, the world's distortion is overcome because the subject stops participating in ignorance. The negation produces a drama where truth is imposed as public fact. The affirmation produces a drama where truth is realized as inward certainty. Both unmask, but one does so by summons and sentence, the other by awakening and self-disclosure. If judgment is public, then power itself cannot remain hidden. The arena expands to include rulers, persecutors, and systems of authority. Exposure becomes political. Justice is no longer abstract, it rearranges the hierarchy of visibility. Tertullian famously casts the final judgment as a reversal in which persecutors and proud rulers are brought low while the despised faithful are vindicated. His language in Apologeticum 48, what a spectacle that will be, when I behold so many proud monarchs, groaning in the lowest abyss, makes reversal itself a moral argument. Justice is proven by the downfall of those who judged Christians and the exaltation of those judged. The axis remains external. Wrongdoers do not confess. They are condemned. The oppressed do not merely find inner liberation, they are publicly vindicated. As mythos, this is not simply moral satisfaction, it is the world's hierarchy collapsing under a superior authority. The story tells you that political and social power never had ultimate jurisdiction, but it also tells you that those who abused power will be made to answer by force of sentence rather than by internal conversion. The reversal is therefore a negated image of transformation. Instead of tyrants awakening and relinquishing domination, domination is ended by imposed adjudication. The spectacle is part of the meaning because it demonstrates to all that worldly judgment was inverted. In affirmative Gnostic myth, powers and rulers are often overcome by the withdrawal of ignorance rather than by punitive overthrow. Liberation occurs when the soul recognizes that the archontic order operates through deception and misrecognition. The rulers lose authority because the subject no longer grants it. Accountability is therefore directed inward. The soul confronts how it has been complicit in its own captivity, how it has mistaken the lower for the highest, and the reversal occurs as a reorientation of consciousness. When the direction changes from outward condemnation to inward emancipation, reversal becomes less a spectacle and more a release. Tertullian's pattern teaches that injustice will be answered by a final courtroom that humiliates oppressors. The Gnostic pattern teaches that oppression is finally broken when illusion is refused from within. The negation dramatizes justice as the public toppling of enemies. The affirmation dramatizes justice as the interior collapse of their jurisdiction. The message shifts from "they will be made" to "pay to their power ends" when you stop mistaking it for ultimate. Exposure and reversal, however, do not yet settle permanence. A verdict must be enforced. If judgment is pronounced, what makes it irreversible? Fire enters as the mechanism that transforms declaration into duration. Tertullian treats eschatological fire as a real instrument of judgment, tied to divine sentence rather than to subjective transformation. In Apologeticum 48, he speaks of punishment in terms that assume duration and consequence, with fire sustained by God's judgment. Here, fire is not primarily a metaphor for insight. It is an outward mechanism by which accountability is enforced. The wicked do not awaken into remorse as the resolving act. They are assigned to punishment as the settling act. Under a mythic reading, fire becomes the element that fixes meaning from outside the self. It is the opposite of ambiguity and self-exculpation. Whatever you were, you are now made to be, under an irrevocable verdict. Fire therefore signifies not simply pain, but the impossibility of evasion. It is the negation of inward purification because it does not require a subject's acceptance of truth. It operates whether the subject consents or not. Accountability is demanded by the judge and executed upon the judged. In Gnostic affirmation, the closest analogue to fire is often light, an illuminating force that reveals the true and burns away the false by making it untenable. Purification occurs as knowledge. The soul is tested insofar as it can bear truth without reverting to deception. Accountability is internalized because the agent becomes the one who must consent to reality. The burning away is the stripping of illusion, less an imposed penalty than the consequence of seeing clearly. When the direction shifts, the meaning of fire changes from punitive enforcement to transformative disclosure. Tertullian's fire says, "The world requires an outward instrument to settle what inwardly would not be settled." The Gnostic fire says, "Illusion cannot survive contact with truth once truth is inwardly received." The negation produces a cosmos where consequence must be applied to agents from without. The affirmation produces a cosmos where the agent's awakened knowledge is itself the purgation. The message changes from justice is executed to truth is assimilated. But fire does not act autonomously. Every sentence implies a sovereign will. Who authorizes this tribunal? Who converts exposure and punishment into ultimate authority? The identity of the judge determines whether justice is imposed or awakened. Tertullian's portrayal of Christ culminates in sovereign adjudication. The one whom the world judged returns to judge the world. He will judge the world who was judged from Apologeticum. 21 is not merely Christological irony. It is the pivot by which accountability is transferred from human forums to divine tribunal. Christ's authority is external and decisive. He does not only reveal, he sentences. He does not merely awaken the conscience. He presides over the court that compels recognition. Mythically, this casts the world as fundamentally incompetent at judgment. The reversal, condemned becoming judge, exposes that human courts, political regimes, and public opinion misread reality at the deepest level. Therefore, an outside authority must intervene to settle what the world cannot settle. This is the negation. Salvation and justice are not primarily the soul's return to its own highest knowing. They are the world's subjection to a judge whose verdict overrides all prior verdicts. Accountability is demanded from without, because the world's own evaluative structures are themselves part of the distortion. In Gnostic affirmation, the Redeemer figure more often functions as revealer than as external magistrate. The Logos descends to disclose origin and to awaken recognition, so that the soul can judge the lower world rightly by knowing the higher. Authority is internalized as gnosis. The Redeemer does not primarily stand above as a sentencing power. He stands within as the means by which the subject becomes capable of truth. Accountability is demanded as self-honesty under revelation. When the direction changes, the Redeemer's role changes from sovereign adjudicator to interior criterion. Tertullian's Christ resolves distortion by imposing verdict on a mistaken world. The Gnostic Redeemer resolves distortion by enabling the soul to stop mistaking the world. The Negation teaches that justice requires an external judge because inward discernment fails. The Affirmation teaches that liberation requires inward illumination because external courts are part of the trap. The message shifts from the judge will settle it to knowledge will free you to settle it within. Once the judge has spoken, what remains? If accountability is fully externalized, it must culminate in final assignment. Separation becomes permanent, mixture intolerable. The end of history reveals what kind of resolution the system was always moving toward. Tertullian's final judgment ends not in a temporary correction, but in fixed destinies. Separation that does not heal into unity, but endures as final assignment. This is the culmination of outward accountability. The court not only decides, it permanently allocates. The story's force lies in irreversibility. The world's moral ambiguity is not gradually transfigured from within. It is terminated by a conclusive division rendered by authority. The outcome is stability through finality, achieved by external sentence. As mythos, this becomes the logic of a cosmos that cannot sustain ongoing mixture. The mingling of righteousness and wickedness, truth and falsehood, victim and persecutor is treated as an intolerable condition that must be ended decisively. Eternal allocation therefore functions as the ultimate negation of inward development. Growth, repentance, and interior reorientation are not the primary engine of resolution at the end. The primary engine is the verdict that fixes identities in relation to justice, reward, or punishment, so that the moral history of a life is sealed from outside the self. In Gnostic affirmation, the end tends toward restoration into fullness. Separation occurs to undo mixture, but its aim is the reintegration of what truly belongs to the higher reality. The decisive movement is inward alignment, recognizing one's origin, shedding what is alien, and returning to plenitude. Accountability is therefore experienced as self-sorting under truth. The soul lets go of what is not itself and ascends by consent to its own proper reality. When the direction changes from inward return to outward allocation, the meaning of the end changes from reunification to partition. The Gnostic end says, once inward accountability is realized, what is true naturally returns and what is false falls away. Tertullian's end says, because inward accountability did not resolve the world's distortion, an external judgment must conclude it by assigning each to an everlasting state. The negation yields a finality of sentence. The affirmation yields a finality of recognition. The message shifts from the self returns to fullness by truth to the world is settled by decree. Some lessons are never announced as lessons. They arrive clothed in the very forms that seem to distract from understanding. Human beings attend most intensely to spectacle, noise, drama, exposure, triumph, humiliation. What is staged commands attention, what is quiet is ignored. For that reason, some of the most profound stories do not oppose spectacle directly, but inhabit it so completely that they reveal its structure from within. They demonstrate, not by retreating from display but by exaggerating display to its logical conclusion, how spectacle itself can blind the soul. In this way, a drama can function as negation hidden in plain sight, presenting one thing so forcefully that its inversion becomes visible to those who can perceive structure beneath surface. In the eschatological imagination of Tertullian, especially in works like De Spectaculis and Apologeticum, the final judgment is rendered not merely as an event, but as the ultimate arena. The persecuted will watch their persecutors. Emperors will groan before the gaze of those they once condemned. The dead will rise, bodies reassembled, summoned into visibility. Books will be opened, verdicts pronounced, fire will burn without appeal. The entire cosmos becomes a tribunal in which nothing remains concealed. At first glance, this appears to be a triumph of justice over spectacle. The Christian refuses the Roman games only to await a truer and holier display. Yet the structure is more severe than simple reversal. The arena is not abolished, it is universalized. The spectacle is not critiqued, it becomes the condition of reality itself. Resurrection, in this framework, is not inward coherence or spiritual awakening, it is compulsory visibility. The insistence on the same flesh ensures that no one escapes presentation. The body returns because the body can be displayed. Whatever was done in history must be staged again before the judge. There is no protected interior left untouched by exposure. The self is not gathered for reflection but for appearance. Identity is fixed through being seen. The logic is unmistakable. What cannot be staged does not count. The resurrection secures the stage. It guarantees that nothing evades performance. Public judgment intensifies this logic. The books are opened not to enlighten the conscience but to establish evidence. The verdict is not discovery but decree. Being and being judged collapse into a single condition. There is no remainder of hidden meaning beyond the tribunal. Reality becomes juridical fact. The fire that follows does not illuminate, it enforces. It does not purify through insight, it sustains the sentence. Meaning is not assimilated inwardly but assigned outwardly and maintained without revision. In this imagination, permanence belongs not to inner transformation but to enacted judgment. The spectacle is not an illustration of reality, it is the mechanism by which reality is finalized. The reversal of power completes the pattern. Those who once controlled visibility, emperors, magistrates, cultural elites, are themselves made visible. They are staged, exposed, humiliated. Yet even here the structure of spectacle remains intact. Justice does not dissolve the arena, it transfers authority over it. The persecuted do not escape theatricality, they inherit it. The world ends not in quiet reconciliation, but in total exposure. Nothing is real except what is shown. Nothing endures except what has been publicly assigned its place. This is negation hidden in plain sight. By amplifying spectacle to its absolute form, the narrative reveals a world in which the hunger for display governs even the imagination of justice. The lesson is not whispered but dramatized. When attention is captured entirely by what is staged, the soul may forget to ask whether reality requires a stage at all. The story does not step outside spectacle to critique it. It fulfills spectacle so completely that its totalizing nature becomes visible. In doing so, it exposes the possibility that a consciousness formed by arenas and tribunals may only be able to imagine truth once it has been performed.